We've been reading A Course in Miracles, and we are on chapter 13, The Guiltless World. And this is section 2, The Guiltless Son of God. The ultimate purpose of projection is always to get rid of guilt. Yet, characteristically, the ego attempts to get rid of guilt from its viewpoint only, for much as the ego wants to retain guilt, you find it intolerable, since guilt stands in the way of your remembering God, whose pull is so strong that you cannot resist it. On this issue, then, the deepest split of all occurs, for if you are to retain guilt as the ego insists, you cannot be you. Only by persuading you that it is you could the ego possibly induce you to project guilt and thereby keep it in your mind. Yet consider how strange a solution the ego's arrangement is. You project guilt to get rid of it, but you are actually merely concealing it. You do not experience the guilt, but you have no idea. You do experience the guilt, but you have no idea why. On the contrary, you associate it with a weird assortment of, quote, ego ideals, unquote, which the ego claims you have failed. Yet you have no idea that you are failing the Son of God by seeing him as guilty. Believing you are no longer you, you do not realize that you are failing yourself. The darkest of your hidden cornerstones holds your belief in guilt from your awareness. For in that dark and secret place is the realization that you have betrayed God's Son by condemning him to death. You do not even suspect this murderous but insane idea lies hidden there, for the ego's destructive urge is so intense that nothing short of the crucifixion of God's Son can ultimately satisfy it. It does not know who the Son of God is because it is blind. Yet let it perceive guiltlessness everywhere, anywhere, and it will try to destroy it because it is afraid. Much of the ego's strange behavior is directly attributable to its definition of guilt. To the ego, the guiltless are guilty. Those who do not attack are its, quote, enemies, unquote, because by not valuing its interpretation of salvation, they are in an excellent position to let it go. They have approached the darkest and deepest cornerstone in the ego's foundation, and while the ego can withstand your raising all else to question, it guards this one secret with its life, for its existence depends on keeping this secret. So it is this secret that we must look upon, for the ego cannot protect you against truth, and in its presence the ego is dispelled. In the calm light of truth, let us recognize that you believe you have crucified God's Son. You have not admitted to this, quote, terrible, unquote, secret, because you would still wish to crucify him if you could find him. Yet the wish has hidden him from you because it is very fearful, and so you are afraid to find him. You have handled this wish to kill yourself by not knowing who you are and identifying with something else. You have projected guilt blindly and indiscriminately, but you have not uncovered its source. For the ego does want to kill you, and if you identify with it, you must believe its goal is yours. I have said that the crucifixion is the symbol of the ego. When it was confronted with the real guiltlessness of God's Son, it did attempt to kill him, and the reason it gave was the guiltlessness is blasphemous to God. To the ego is God, and guiltlessness must be interpreted as the final guilt that fully justifies murder. You do not yet understand that any fear you may experience in connection with this course stems ultimately from this interpretation, but if you will consider your reactions to it, you will become increasingly convinced that this is so. This course has explicitly stated that its goal for you is happiness and peace, yet you are afraid of it. You have been told again and again that it will set you free, yet sometimes react as if it is trying to imprison you. You often dismiss it more readily than you dismiss the ego's thought system. To some extent, then, you must believe that by not learning the course, you are protecting yourself. And you do not realize that it is only your guiltlessness that can protect you. The atonement has always been interpreted as the release from guilt, and this is correct if it is understood. Yet even when I interpret it for you, you may reject it and do not accept it for yourself. You have perhaps recognized the futility of the ego and its offerings, but though you do not want them, you may not yet look upon the alternative with gladness. In the extreme, you are afraid of redemption, and you believe it will kill you. Make no mistake about the depth of this fear, for you believe that, in the presence of truth, you might turn on yourself and destroy yourself. Little child, this is not so. Your, quote, guilty secret, unquote, is nothing, and if you will but bring it to the light will dispel it. And then no dark cloud will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father, for you will remember his guiltless Son, who did not die because he is immortal, and you will see that you were redeemed with him and have never been separated from him. In this understanding lies your remembering, for it is the recognition of love without fear. There will be great joy in heaven on your homecoming, and the joy will be yours, for the redeemed Son of Man is the guiltless Son of God, and to recognize him is your redemption. Right. This little section here is called the guiltless Son of God. Who is the Son of God? Not only Jesus. Jesus is giving the course. I'm gonna take a step back and just kind of, if you're watching this for the first time, you might need a little refresher, and even those who have been studying the course might need a little refresher. Jesus is the one that's giving the course. He's the one speaking here through Helen Schuckman, who was the scribe, and she was hearing Jesus as an inner voice of some kind, and she wrote what he was saying down, and Jesus is saying, we are all the Son of God. We are all equally the Son of God. We are all the children of God, but we are also all the one Son of God. Now, how that is to be experienced and understood. The Course is pointing the way to understand that. How can we all be the one Son of God? And the Bible does make it sound like we are guilty, we are sinful. Christian theology makes it seem as if we are inherently sinful. And to think that we are not is blasphemous. Let's read this one little part here. I have said that the crucifixion is a symbol of the ego. When it was confronted with the real guiltlessness of God's Son, it did attempt to kill him. And the reason it gave was that guiltlessness is blasphemous to God. So this is one understanding of religion, is that God, to think that you are not guilty is blasphemous, and God will punish those who are sinful, and does punish those who are sinful, or those who are sinful are punished. To the ego is God, and guiltlessness must be interpreted as the final guilt that fully justifies murder. You do not yet understand that any fear you may experience in connection with this course stems ultimately from this interpretation. But if you will consider your reactions to it, you will become increasingly convinced that this is so. And then Jesus goes on to say that the Course has explicitly stated that its goal for you is happiness and peace, yet you are afraid of it. So Jesus is trying to explain to us, and he does this a number of times throughout the Course, why you don't want to learn this course. Why are you struggling with this course? Now, there may actually be a lot of reasons on the surface. For example, you don't necessarily trust the source. You don't know that it really came from Jesus, that this is really Jesus speaking. How do you know? Who knows? How does anyone know? Right. Well, that is a very serious issue, I would say. And I would say, I don't know if anyone honestly can say for sure. People can there have been various ways of trying to determine that. Like, you could read the aura of the book, or you could, muscle test the book, or you could, pray to God and ask for clarity about it. So that's one big issue. How do you know it's really from Jesus? Maybe Helen actually made it up, or it was some other spirit coming through. It wasn't necessarily Jesus coming through. All right, that's one thing. Let's read this part though. This course is explicitly stated that its goal for you is happiness and peace, yet you are afraid of it. You have been told again and again that it will set you free, yet you sometimes react as if it is trying to imprison you. You often dismiss it more readily than you dismiss the ego's thought system. To some extent, then, you must believe that by learning the course, you are protecting yourself. And you do not realize that it is only your guiltlessness that can protect you. So, Jesus is saying that ultimately, it doesn't even matter ultimately if Jesus is giving this course or not. That's one thing. Doesn't matter. Maybe, it's really the message, and does the message work, and is the message true? And the only way you can really know is by putting it into practice. But many people are brought to the course because it speaks to something that they already know within themselves. They've already intuited it, or they've already gotten a hint of it in their life, which is this phenomenon of guilt. Where does guilt come from? And why do I feel guilty? And Jesus is here saying that he's talking about projection. So remember, there's only projection and extension, according to what Jesus is saying here. The ego projects and the Holy Spirit extends. The ego projects guilt. The Holy Spirit extends non-judgment, forgiveness. Perfect forgiveness. Complete forgiveness. Okay? The ego tries to get rid of guilt. So we try to, let's say, in alliance with the ego, we try to get rid of our guilt by putting the problem outside of ourselves. And oftentimes, it's through blame, through blaming others, blaming situations, blaming God, blaming, other things outside of ourselves. And in doing that, what happens, and we think that by doing that, we get rid of the guilt. And Jesus is telling us that no, we are actually just reinforcing our own guilt in doing that. We're just reinforcing it. We're just digging the hole deeper by doing that. And we're getting more deeply entrenched in the ego thought system. And in doing that, we see ourselves as the ego wants us to see ourselves, which is as an ego personality in a body that is basically doomed to just live a brief existence, span of life, and then die, and that's it. And ultimately, as Jesus said just a little earlier, the ego really is after murder. It's the symbol of the ego is crucifixion, as Jesus says here. The ego is all about crucifying us. And if we accept the ego, if we ally with the ego, that's really what we're doing, not only to ourselves but to others as well. It's crucifixion. And do we want to be part of that? Do we want to be part of the crucifixion of the Son of God, which is all of us? Or do we want to be part of the redemption or the resurrection? Different words for the same thing. Redemption, resurrection of God's Son, remembering, knowing that that is all of us. That is in liberating ourselves, in liberating God's Son, we are liberating ourselves. And in liberating ourselves, we are liberating others as well. And we really have to look at this dark cornerstone. Jesus calls it the dark cornerstone of guilt, and address that and shine light on that. And by shining light on it, which Jesus is doing in this chapter and actually throughout the whole course, the hope is to dispel that thought, that the ego thought system, which is based in guilt. That we are guilty, we have sinned against God. Ultimately, this is what it goes back to. We have sinned against God. We deserve to be punished. But we can't deal with that. And so we push the problem outside of ourselves, and we basically refuse to look at it. And it's there. It's within all of us. That dark cornerstone is within all of us, and it's there for all of us to look at. But few do, because it is so scary. It's very, very scary. I mean, horrifying, actually, when you look at it, and horrifying when you recognize that you are actually a part of this crucifixion. You're crucifying yourself. There's a great line somewhere in the course later on where Jesus says, "Forgive your father. It was not his will that you be crucified." It's a great line. We're all crucifying ourselves until we decide not to, until we make the choice not to crucify, not to be part of the crucifixion. The world, the world is, if crucifixion is the symbol of the ego, so is the world. And the world is the picture of crucifixion, of God's Son. But we do not, as Jesus said in the Gospels, you can be in the world but not of the world. So Jesus is here giving us the way to be in the world but not of the world. And to be not of the world is to basically to take Jesus's hand here and to trust that the message is true, and that if we take his hand and we practice what he's saying, if we put into practice, we will see the results. We will find our way to true joy, true peace, and the true love that we is really our true nature. It's not just that we're seeking it to have it, but like Jesus says, having is being. When you have love, you realize that you are it, right? So let's see if there's anything else here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Jesus talks about your guilty secret. It's a little play on words. Little child, your guilty secret is nothing, and if you will but bring it to the light will dispel it. And then no dark cloud will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father, for you will remember his guiltless Son, who did not die because he is immortal. My teacher, Karanamai, would often say, I remember her actually clearly saying, or maybe I read it, that she said this. She said, "Why, my children, why do we not see God? Why are we not seeing God?" And she did not put her finger on guilt, actually. And very few people have. That's something unique about the Course, is that it is bringing this to light about the phenomenon of guilt, and just basically asking, is that God's doing? Is that the God of love, the good God of love? Would God really put us here only to feel guilty. Karaname's answer was, it's the cloud. The clouds are in the way. It's the same thing. The clouds are in the way of seeing God, of knowing God. We have to remove the clouds. We have to remove what's in the way. And then we will see, because the sun is always shining. The sun, you could say the sun of God is always shining, ever shining, forever shining. It is only for us to remove the clouds in the way of the sun. Thank you for listening. See you next time. We're going to be reading The Fear of Redemption.